and a moment that we've all been very eagerly waiting for. I'd like to thank all of you who are in the hall for having stayed back right till the end. He is the Ramon Magsaysay Award 2018 winner, innovator and education reformist. Sonam Wangchuk is the founding director of the Students' Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, SECMOL, also known for designing the SECMOL campus that runs on solar energy and uses no fossil fuels for cooking, lighting, or heating. He invented the ice stupa technique that creates artificial glaciers used for storm winter water in form of conical-shaped ice heaps. Ms. Wangchuk was instrumental in the launch of Operation New Hope in 1994, a collaboration of the government, village communities, and the civil society to bring reforms in the government school system. Ladies and gentlemen, he's an inspiration to all of us, and it is indeed an honor and a pleasure to have him here at the IESA Vision Summit 2019, the closing keynote speaker. Please put your hands together for the one and only Sonam Wangchuk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy and excited to be here in Bangalore, in the warmth of everything, people like yourselves, and the climate here, coming yesterday from Ladakh, where it was minus 15. I barely managed to fly out of the cloudy skies. And it's great learning opportunity for me to see all that's happening here. I see some things common and a lot of things different in our two worlds. You work in the comfort of the plains and the warmth. I work in the high mountains in sub-zero temperatures. You work in digital technology and artificial intelligence and so on. I happen to work with more like still wood and iron and natural materials and some natural intelligence, which still is still is not out of fashion totally. But we share a very common important spirit, and that spirit is of innovation. The spirit of innovation is what brings us together. In my case, it's innovation amidst adversities, where necessity becomes the mother of invention and you solve problems of the people. And again, problem solving is another common thing that binds us, and I'm sure you all are driven by this need and urge to solve problems that people face, and we try to do the same in another part of the world. So I'll be sharing a little bit of our journey in this very different world across the mountains, just to give you a change from what perhaps you have been talking for the last 2 days, all about electrons and digits and so on. I'll take you to a different world to refresh you and see how similar principles and values can drive problem solving in a very different context. So what we perhaps would share is this approach to solving problems, approach to creating value out of very little resources, or what I call out of thin air sometimes. Innovation is more interesting if it happens with little resources or no resources, but it can then solve serious problems. So I'll share this journey of innovation amidst adversities with you, knowing that it's a different world, but we have common values that bind us. And to do that, I'll take the help of some images. When we are dealing with a place that is very different from most of the world, I always say images speak more than my 1,000 words. So here I'll tell my story with these images. This is Ladakh, my world, a little away from here, up in the top north of our country, across and beyond the Himalayas. Actually, we are not in the Himalayas, we are trans-Himalayas, so across the Himalayas. And for that reason, you will see that the monsoon clouds that make the Himalayas very green and provide you all the water hardly helps us, because the clouds are not able to cross the mountains, and therefore we are said to be in a rain shadow. And a rain shadow can create a dry, cold desert. So this is Ladakh. If you're approaching by air, you would almost think life was not possible here. It's more, I always say, a moonscape than a landscape, or maybe Marscape nowadays. But if you look carefully, then you see small patches of green, oases, that our ancestors created. So human ingenuity made life possible here, where we have hardly 100 millimeters of precipitation in a whole year. Our ancestors used their creative imagination to channelize melting glacial water by cutting the rocks and bringing every precious drop of water to any flat patch of desert land, and then greened it. This is also a place where human beings have actually enriched nature rather than robbing it of its greenery and so on. There is no deforestation possible anyway, so it is only afforestation for a change. People have not only survived, but a whole colorful civilization has thrived. And innovation is something that was a part of life here. Like I said, making farming possible almost on sandy rocks with glacial meltwater, which was a drudgery, but our ancestors did not have machines and technology to make farming easier. They had another kind of creativity and innovation. What they would do is that every agricultural activity would be accompanied by a song or a whistle or a dance. Dance, when it is making the roofs of the houses, you dance and tap the soil. When you're winnowing, you whistle in beautiful tunes to invite the winds. And when that happens, work becomes like a dance or a picnic, where the whole community goes to each family one by one to do the farming activities. And I can tell you, even if it is hard work, the community and the cultural creativity makes it a joyous experience, and definitely better than the lonely Californian farmer in his huge combine harvester cabin would feel. Yeah? So I think technologies can be of different kinds, which takes all the hard work away but makes you lonely alone in a big machine, or creativity in other ways that makes the work light and easy. Similarly, winters are cold and long, -20 to -30 degrees. Long winters were painful, but our ancestors had interesting ways of solving them. First of all, they would build houses where animals would live in the ground floor, and from another entry, human beings would live on the first floor, and they both would symbiotically keep each other warm. Then, to address the long winters, they didn't have all the heating HVAC technologies, but they had, again, creativity of culture. So winter is full of festivals and fairs, and all the monasteries and different villages have festivals. And young people look up to winter and count the cold, long winter away from festival to festival. Innovation, another kind of technology. Similarly, as a child, I remember come winter and children all look up to their grandparents for stories and stories. Every night there are stories. And then when spring comes and the first blade of green comes out, it's said to be sinful to be telling stories. Our grandmothers would shoo us away, telling us that now it is sinful after the greens have come. And I kept wondering why it is sinful to listen to stories. I later understood it was a clever engineering. When the greens come out, you better be working. You can't waste your summer away. So it's sinful because you should be making all the food for the whole year and reserving the fun of stories for the winter. When there's nothing to do, you pass the winter. So they had other kinds of ways of creating value out of thin air, as I say. So this is the childhood I had, observing this ingenuity and thinking of innovation in a bigger scale than just technical, mechanical, in contraptions. But up in the mountains, we are a very tiny, microscopic minority. Not only linguistic and ethnic, but even climatic and technological, because things that work in Bangalore or New Delhi hardly work in Ladakh. So in the cold of Ladakh, even running a tap becomes quite a circus, as you can see. So the villagers are making a fire to keep the tap running, not because there's no technology, there are, but because we just copy something from New Delhi and paste it up at 3,500 meters. They don't work. That's why we in the mountains have to innovate to solve our problems differently. And in any case, they don't work in New Delhi half the time, so even less chances that they'll work in Ladakh with the same treatment, right? So that's why my life has been about engaging young people in solving problems in the local context and using the education as a part of this process, or making education a process of solving problems, applying what they learn. Now, being a tiny minority hurts no people more than the little people, children. Children are really at the receiving end. When I was a teenager, I got to see this, and children were failing en masse in the schooling system. In the 10th grade board exams, 95% would fail every year, repeatedly. And yet, people would blame the children for being, almost retarded. Sometimes, some teachers who would be imported from across the mountains in Kashmir or Jammu would come and not understand the context nor the language, and then make theories about the children. These children, Ladakhi children, will never understand maths or science. There is not enough oxygen in the air. Okay. So, there couldn't be anything worse you could do to the children, because they know they can't fabricate oxygen and do something, so they might as well give up. And that's what they did, and that's why the results. I tried to understand why they were failing, because if 95% fail in any system, any industry, electronics, cars, jam factory, if 95% fail, the products are not to be blamed, it's the system, right? So I was trying to understand. I soon understood that what was taught was not at all relevant, made no sense. It was in an alien language, not the language of the people. It was about a different context. Just to give you an example, I like this example. You teach children A for apple, B for ball, and so on. Very clever, using something concrete to make sense of an abstract. A and B are just squiggles or codes that grown-ups have made up. Now some clever person used these concrete examples that a child could relate to. We what we do, we copy that and paste it in Ladakh, and then it becomes, in minus 30 winter, children are being made to memorize F for fan, F for fan. And when they ask, what is this fan, the teacher might say, it keeps you cool. And the children, why do we need to be more cold than what we have already? That's just one example. It's full of irrelevant content, and therefore they fail. I was lucky to come across this situation while doing my engineering, because I had to teach students to support my own engineering. So I learned that actually the children were very bright. They could understand everything when explained in the way they learn, not the way we teach. But if taught the way they learn, they could grasp every science, maths, whatever it is. And therefore, I decided, rather than adding to the long queues of engineers waiting for employment, I would go and change this system so that so many more, hundreds and thousands of bright engineers, farmers, teachers could be liberated from the ills of this system. So that's when I started working to change this system. After I finished my own mechanical engineering, I put it for a while on a back burner and went back to change this system. And in doing that, we needed to change the policies of the local government at least. And governments don't change policies like that. Especially if you are only 21, you go to the government and say, your system is not working wrong, I'll suggest, they'll say, get lost, right? So what we did was a strategy of changing people's priorities. In a democracy, governments reflect people's moods and priorities. So we wanted to change the priorities of the people from kerosene and subsidies and rice and so on to quality education. Now that's, again, easier said than done. So to do that, we took the help of the victims of the system, the hundreds of so-called failures out of the system became our agency for change, who I call the ants army. The ants army of helpless students who had failed were very good at going out to the villages and changing people's priorities from these things, doles and handouts, to quality education. And when that changed, government changed its policy. In '96, Ladakh became perhaps the first region in India to declare education as their top priority. Strangely, we don't normally have education as our priority of governments. Not a surprise, because that's not the priority of the people. Government reflects people. So using democracy, we changed the people's priority rather than going to a minister and changing their priority, because even if they do, even if they are kind, the next minister will reverse it all if it is not people's priority, right? So we changed that, and therefore policies, we redid all the textbooks to reflect local realities, relevant context and so on, retrained the teachers, and slowly these started having an effect. And as you can see, after a continuous, slowly the results started changing too. And I always say to me, this is a great scientific proof that it was not oxygen in the air. For those who still fail, you see that 25% still fail. And why should anybody fail? We thought, if they didn't learn the way they were taught, let's teach the way they learn. And human young ones in general are not designed to learn from a classroom and a lecture for 6 hours, scribbling notes and sitting passive This is not what we have evolved over millions of years to become. You know, for millions of years, we have evolved to be practical, to be in the field, out in real nature, as hunter-gatherers, as settled farmers. Our children were always shoulder to shoulder with grown-ups, learning in action. Sometimes risky, life-threatening actions, but that's what nature then prepared our young ones for. And that's why you see young people are so energetic. And what we do for the last at least 200-300 years of industrial revolution, we put them in a classroom and talk to them, lecture them, and make them write without any opportunity for their energy to come out. And then it comes out in ugly forms, which I hypothesize is perhaps what teenager rage rebellion is. In remote Ladakhi villages, there is no concept of such a thing, because young people keep engaged in very important roles in the society. So we wanted to recreate that, recreate what we are designed by evolution. So we went to a patch of dry desert in the middle of nowhere to create a school which would be designed and built by the students and run by the students, the so-called failures. We went with a batch of some 20 so-called failures, and then over the next 5 or so years, we created a school which was designed, built, and run by the students themselves. Now, this school is somewhat different from most schools. To begin with, the school's admission criteria is not marks and ranks, but rather failure in this system. Yeah? So if you have failed, you stand all the chances to getting here. But then you have to actually work and engage yourselves. It's not a passive sitting in the desk kind of education. So students run this system. They are in the driving seat, having designed and built, with adult guidance, of course, but actually physically built even. They run the system like a little country, with its own government and with its own little parliament. The new, for 2 months, it keeps changing every 2 months. The new government takes up the responsibility. They plan, they target, set goals, they execute, and at the end of the 2 months, they present before the parliament, and they get important responsibilities to run the system. So these responsibilities are not just case studies or mock responsibilities, they are actual, taking care of all the cows for milk, or the solar gadgets, or producing organic vegetables. But while doing that, they relate to what they study in the classrooms and apply them in real. So those who are producing organic vegetables would, for example, sell their product to the campus kitchen at a selling price. And they would work backwards and find out the cost price, and then learn practically that profit is equal to selling price minus cost price, not just memorize this as a formula. Similarly, others work on the solar power plant or the greenhouses and learn and apply physics and biology that they learned. More complex, theories like germ theory would be learned when it's apricot time, when all the apricots fall at a time and most go to waste to cows. We use germ theory and make hundreds of bottles of jam and keep it for the whole year with a shelf life now of 1 to 2 years, from 1 to 2 weeks. So they can see that what is in the books actually solves problems, can create value. Or they would then share the experience on the campus radio, the campus newspaper. Like a little country, it has everything that a country has. Now, this becomes a career path for many. Some of them who like a part of what they learned at the school make that a career. And there are several startups who, for example, loved this fruit pulp thing and started fruit pulp and jam supply, export. Others who take care of guests would start travel companies, add value in their own region, make cheese of international quality, and so on. So alongside understanding, it becomes something that they can take on in their lives. Other innovations revolve around the themes of earth, sun, ice, and fire. Primordial concepts. So with earth, for example, this whole campus is built with earth, a natural material we find right under our feet, abundantly available to everybody, rich or poor. And our ancestors were masters of that. And we thought in the 90s when we started this school, why give up what our ancestors had mastered? Why not add to that modern science? So we went to see, for example, forts and palaces that had lasted for 500 to 1,000 years, made of mud, without any protection. They were still standing. There must have been something right about them. So analyzing what had gone right and recreating, we built the whole campus with a material that was affordable for everyone. And then we added to this technique something our ancestors didn't know: passive solar heat or thermodynamics, which they didn't have. They didn't have transparent materials like glass. So we added that. And down there you can see how the chapter on heat in 9th class would change their lives. So the students could see their chapter come alive. If you remember, the chapter on heat would be about conduction, convection, radiation, which most of us memorize and then forget. But here they get to see that the greenhouse heats the air inside, which becomes hot and therefore lighter and enters the upper windows, goes inside, loses its heat to the fat earth walls, making them warm and cooling itself, and therefore sinking down and pushed into the greenhouse to keep the cycle continuing all day, a convection current, which is how the winds blow on Earth. A micro wind, without any fan or any motor or moving parts, no fuel, nothing, but it keeps transferring the sun's heat to the room and makes the walls warm. And at night, then, the warm walls radiate to the indoor and keeps the people warm. Or the south wall, which directly also receives sun and has a peak temperature at, say, 2 p.m. in the day. Slowly, the heat conducts through the dense material and reaches the inside at 2 a.m. in the night. That's when you need heat, and starts radiating. So kids get to see conduction, convection, radiation actually working to change their lives, and of course the chapter becomes unforgettable. Learning along the way the geography of how the sun and earth moves. So because of this 23-degree tilt, the winter sun in the northern hemisphere is always in the south sky. So the south sky, the sun will rise and set. And therefore, we learn to design our buildings in a way that it captures all the south sun in the winter. But in summer, when the sun goes overhead, not a single ray enters the building. Therefore, these buildings are coolest in the summer and warmest in the winter. Now, orienting it in a direction doesn't cost any money. It would cost the same. So therefore, creating value out of thin air just by using direction, no cost. Using materials like earth, no cost. Using the sun, no cost. Value out of thin air to solve a serious problem of minus 30, minus 20 winters. We haven't used much of electronics or digital technologies here, but because till recently we hardly had the scope of that. We hardly have electricity in Ladakh. Here at this campus we have photovoltaics, but rest of Ladakh only now we are starting to get electricity, or connectivity, which has been non-existent. Now it is changing. So there is scope to integrate and make them more efficient with the kind of technologies you work with, and you can imagine where what could be used, and we could collaborate also. But even manually closing the windows, to make the convection work, it's students who have that responsibility of opening the windows in the morning and closing them at night. These could be, of course, automated. But in a school, it actually is even helpful for the children to know why they do what they do. And then you have houses on the ground, if you come, that capture all the sun from the south, as I said, and none from the roof, therefore coolest in summer. So it's actually cutting-edge natural technology, nature's technology, alongside ancestral techniques of farming and so on, using animals, the manure from which goes to fertilize the soil, and we find beautiful balance in it. Some people may wonder, why don't they use tractors? Well, tractors don't give manure. In fact, it binds us into the cash trap of going and paying for the diesel, and then paying for artificial fertilizers, and then getting a land that is infertile and sick people. The whole natural cycle breaks. So sometimes we believe the best thing about technology is the wisdom to know where it should be used and where not. And you get indoor environment which is not worse than any other. It can be very aesthetically beautiful, even if it is made from earth. Mud, by the way, it's the healthiest material with no toxic emissions or releases from walls or floors or anything. Very healthy, which balances the moisture automatically, which balances the thermal comfort automatically. You could hardly have material like this. It would take a lot of sensors and a lot of gadgets if you were to do this with artificial intelligence. Natural intelligence, therefore, works, as I was saying. So, in the beginning, when we went for earth as a building material and sun as an energy source, people would laugh at us, saying, we are going backwards against the trends and so on. But we saw nothing wrong with such a beautiful material and a lifestyle in rhythm, in harmony with nature. And we stood our grounds, even if people laughed. And slowly the world started catching up. By the mid-2000s, thanks to the global warming and environmental crisis, the world actually started seeing value in using materials and sources of energy. And by 2016, for these interventions, we got this Terra Award at the World Earth Congress. So it's not about what 99 people say, and therefore one becomes wrong. If you are right, right is right, even if it is one person treading, and wrong is wrong, even if it is 99% going that way. Nothing wrong with sometimes what we do, just that our mindsets decide. Similarly, at this school, source of energy is the sun for most things, from cooking with parabolic dishes, which students get to study in their optics lessons in 9th and 10th grade science. High school science is all it takes to bring a lot of change in life. Or greenhouses that grow fresh greens or natural lighting, then photovoltaic for what has to have electricity. We try to avoid electricity because you can do directly, as you saw how conduction works. So why have a heater? Why not use it directly from the sun? Water heating, water lifting, and even the cows at the campus live in solar-heated cow sheds. And we accidentally learnt another very important high school science, because when we built this cow shed, out of compassion for animals, really, no science, we discovered that the cows started reciprocating the generosity by giving 2 to 3 times more milk than other cows Yeah? And then we discovered, reverse engineering, that there is some high school science behind it. Can you guess? Well, in high school science, we learn that there are warm-blooded animals and cold-blooded animals. Cows, like us, are warm-blooded animals, and we all need to keep our bodies at 37 degrees. A degree up or low will kill us, fever or hypothermia. You have to maintain exactly that temperature. Now, these poor cows, they're kept in -5 cow sheds, or 0, and the body has to be plus 37. Imagine the difference. So how do they keep their body warm? The food they eat all goes into heating their body. So how do you expect milk? So most cows in cold places dry up in winter. But if you give that warmth artificially from cheaper sources like solar cow sheds, then they don't need to bank on the food, and the food converts to milk, and therefore the generosity. Understood? So high school science actually explains, and this could then be scaled up in all cold parts. If you keep warm sheds, you can more than compensate with the milk productivity. And for these, we finally, again, the world started catching up. We got the Global Sustainability Award 2017 in Paris. So you follow what you want, because in the mid-90s, when we made this school campus off-grid and zero energy, when these terms were not even coined, people didn't understand us. But we saw value a little ahead of the people's. Now people understand the problems, and therefore it is seen as valuable. Back then it wasn't. Now, simple high school technologies can also solve problems as big as the water crisis facing Himalayan valleys. In the Himalayas, glaciers are melting away. You must have heard, right? Global warming. So they're melting away slowly, and people face acute shortage in springtime, especially in springtime, not in other times. This is another interesting thing. What I observed was that even if it is a desert, water shortage was mainly in springtime. Springtime is when the glaciers don't yet melt. It's too cold up there. And they are now smaller and smaller each year, so there's less to melt. So there's only a trickle. And this is also the time when people most need water, because to plant anything, you need water. All the trees that there are wake up after the long winter asking for water, and you don't have. So that's a great crisis. But after spring, midsummer, July, and there is excess of water. There are floods, flash floods, every now and then, you may have heard. And this flow, the big flow, continues into even winter. So in winter also there's a stream flowing, and nobody needs water in winter because no farming. So it just goes without any use into the Arabian Sea. So 3 years ago, together with my students, we said, how about optimizing the water? We use the winter water in springtime by freezing it and keeping it till spring. Of course, again, people laughed. How can you keep winter water, ice, or snow? They all melt away by March end. You don't see any ice. How can you keep it till springtime, May and June? We thought and thought, and luckily one day I saw a big chunk of ice under a bridge outside our school in the month of May. Now May is warm, nearly summer already, and under the bridge also it is warm, nothing different, right? Still the ice has stayed under the bridge. So what is different under the bridge? It's not the warmth of spring. Can you guess? Shade, yes. So what is different is sunlight. So ice doesn't melt because of the spring warmth, it melts because of direct sunlight. And if you cut that sun, then you could keep ice into May as seen under the bridge. but easier said than done. How do you have a huge bridge to cover your huge storage of ice? So we kept thinking of what material cheaper could be used, in shades and this and that, and nothing was practical. And finally, to our rescue came high school science, or in this case, maths. Simple technologies, techniques can have huge impacts. So for example, in geometry, if you remember, we study always that certain shapes have lowest surface area for the given volume. Shapes like spheres, or hemispheres for stability, or cones even. So we said, how about cutting the sun, not with material, this doesn't take us anywhere, let's try something totally different, let's try shapes. And shapes don't cost money. If we can, then we will be creating value out of thin air. Shape doesn't cost money, as direction doesn't cost money, as sun doesn't cost money, as earth doesn't cost money. So therefore, shape is affordable to everyone. So how about making cones of ice rather than just flat ice, which will melt away? But again, cones of ice is easier said than done. Pyramids you're talking about, and pyramids are not easy. You can ask the Egyptians, right? So we thought we are dealing with water, and it has its own qualities or properties. And again, high school or even middle school science came to our help. You know, we learn in school that water always maintains its level. If you have an inlet, the outlet will want to go to the same level. And luckily, in the mountains, we have a resource often ignored called slopes or gravity. So you can see this is a typical hill village where water comes in the stream and goes down. So there is a resource called gravity or gradient. Now, if you put a pipe upstream there will be pressure in that pipe for the water to go up to that level. And if you then use that pressure to run a fountain, something like this, if it works, no? Okay. So if you put a pipe upstream and bring it down to a desert where you want water in the springtime, due to this principle of water maintaining its level, there will be pressure to go to the same level. And if you put a fountain, then it sprays the water into the -20 air, and thereby making it lose that heat which keeps liquid liquid, and without which liquid becomes solid, the heat that's called latent heat, yes, and we often memorize this, right? So you make a pyramid, almost like 3D printing of a grand ice cone. Yeah? So water sprays, falls down, losing its latent heat, and takes the shape of a cone. This one, by the way, is 7 stories tall. This was the pilot ice cone, and it contained roughly 1 million liters of water, which should, if we were correct, melt slower than any other and melt in the time when we need. So we had many bets at our school. Some said it won't last more than mid-March. Others said end of March. Yet others said early May. Mid-May was the wildest, and this lasted till July 6th, the ice, thereby proving that the hypothesis was right. This was half the achievement, to make it technically, happen. The other half was social acceptability. Innovation, as a scientist would do in lab, is fine, but people have to accept it and own it. And therefore, rather than calling them ice cones or ice pyramids, we saw that there are other cones in the landscape, in the culture that we are talking about, and they are called stupas. And stupas are a cherished spiritual monument. Therefore, they resemble, and we call them ice stupas, therefore. And this instantly became a hit among the people. especially, spiritual leaders and so on. And yes, it is always good to collaborate. When you're solving a big problem, the collaboration has to be as big and wide and often with unlikely partners. So we partnered with the spiritual leaders like His Holiness, who is also the UN ambassador for Mountain Partnership, and with children in schools to solve this huge problem of climate change adaptation. This stupa that you saw started feeding plants, 5,000 of them, which were planted in a desert that has never seen any greenery ever. And thanks to this, it bridged the gap of springtime. It's not supposed to give water for all year. It's only those 2 months. After July, there's natural glaciers melting, and the same pipe can bring water. So it's actually not that complicated. So this is the melting phase in June when it is shedding its water, and this is how it works. The right side shows how it makes itself in winter. As I said, it's almost like 3D printing. Yeah? It makes the cone, and then in spring, in May, June, the sun melts it, and the liquid water then is collected in a tank, and from there, it goes to the plants that you saw, drip irrigated. Now, this could be more advanced. We have used rudimentary fountains and techniques we developed ourselves. They need to have more sophistication to respond to temperatures. For example, when it is very cold, a huge volume can go out and still it will freeze. When it is not so cold, close to 0, -3, -4, only a little water should come out. And that's where we could collaborate in controlling, temperature sensitive outlet and so on. Now this year, it started going public. So various villages now make ice stupas in their village valleys, and there's a sort of competition making ice stupas, the tallest and the biggest and so on. So this one is a village, 70 kilometers, 1.5 hours away, and they've built much bigger than what our main R&D team could do. So this ice stupa is 120 feet, which is half the height of Qutub Minar, yeah? All ice. And around this, you can see villages after villages in Ladakh and beyond, even in Switzerland, they are developing it for tourist attraction and for water conservation. So it's spreading to different places. Now, to make it sustainable financially, resource-wise, we are adding other dimensions to it. For example, just last week, as we speak almost, we are starting a new form of tourism in Ladakhi winters, the ice stupa tourism. So one such village has started the ice cafe in Gya, where you can go inside and there's a cafe serving soup, barley soup, and so on. And that becomes an interesting tourist attraction. The idea is experience for the visitors, water for the farmers. Yeah? So that takes care of the cost. In the other village, they have started ice climbing, which is quite a rage in the North Americas and so on. So ice climbing on the ice stupa, it's very tall and needs some technical climbing, which they are good at, and tourists can experience ice climbing on an ice stupa. And finally, this all will melt and become their water. Similarly, we are also working on an even more advanced, sophisticated way of earning income from these ice hotels inside the ice stupas. There are these domes inside every ice stupa for controlling the pipes and a tunnel to access it. Little tweaking and some aesthetics, and we could turn it into an ice hotel. Now, ice hotels around the world charge you anything from $1,000 a day night to $1,500, and we hope to do that. Experience for the visitors, water for the farmers. We are also working on taking this technology to solve even bigger challenges like glacial lakes. So the glaciers are not only melting away silently, they are leaving huge lakes behind as they melt and cause calamities like the Kedarnath flood. Behind that, there was a glacial lake which burst open together with the heavy rains and killed some 70,000 people or so. So we are now working on developing a technique to reduce the level of lake to safer levels. By 3 meters is what the governments want. And in Sikkim, for the Sikkim government, we are actually doing this, siphoning out the lake to reduce it by 3 meters, which is what the government wanted. But we are saying, why only do that? Why not refreeze that lake into ice stupas or an artificial glacial layer right below the lake? So you refreeze into a matrix of ice stupas, which becomes slowly a sheet of ice that melts a little in summer but grows to ice in winter, keeps melting a little and growing more, a thickening sheet of ice, in other words, reglaciating the Himalayas, something that has not happened since the last ice age 10,000 years ago. We are simulating that in high valleys of Ladakh, and if that works there, then we'll put it together there, and if it really works, you'll hear more about it. Simple techniques of using the resource of cold temperature in the air, which costs no money, really. It comes free, minus 30, we get too much of it, actually. So finally, this technique or concept won us the Rolex Award for Enterprise, which comes with a handsome amount of money. So we thought, why not use it to leverage a transformative change in education? Why should solving problems in our own context be just something one-off in a place or a person? Why not make it a part of every young person's experience? And therefore, we use this award to catapult it to a new concept in higher education. So far, it was school education that you saw, and now we are working on an alternative university where such problem-solving exercises will be part of the education, where 2/3 is outdoors solving such problems for the students, and 1/3 experts and lectures and so on. So the day this award was announced, we launched a crowdfunding campaign to create a university on this desert, at the top of which you saw the ice stupas and the trees happening. And slowly we hope to make it all green using this kind of techniques, and then hosting a university which will have ripple effects in all universities to make it more applied, more practical, more relevant to the context. Right now, whether it is Cherrapunji with its rainfall, or Rajasthan with its dry deserts, or mountains in Ladakh, universities are all uniform, equally irrelevant. So we started this crowdfunding to make it a people's university where people participate and people contribute, not just in money, but also expertise, come and teach, come and volunteer, and so on. There's a short film that describes it more in the very end.
I've never let my schooling interfere with my education. So said Mark Twain. How about you? Do you miss your school or college days? You perhaps do, but perhaps not for the classrooms and teachings. You actually perhaps wished every day that the school be closed the next day so you could stay home. But here's a school in Ladakh where the most dreaded punishment is to be sent home for 2 weeks, where students learn by doing things, where they engage in various innovations to solve real-life problems like climate change, where they run the school themselves like a little country with an elected government and learn management and governance that way, where they learn communication by running the campus newspaper and radio, science by designing and building their own school, solar-heated mud buildings that stay at plus 15 even when minus 15 winters. Kindness and compassion through introspection and meditation. A school where the criteria of admission is not your percentage, but that the conventional system has failed you.
Hi, I'm Sonam Wangchuk from Ladakh, a remote mountain region in the Indian Himalayas. 25 years ago, when I was finishing my own engineering education, I saw that schools were a pain for everyone, but for mountain children, it was doubly painful and irrelevant. Children who spoke Ladakhi or Tibetan at home were made to sit all day memorizing in alien languages like Urdu or English. F for fan, S for ship, T for train.
Till recently, every year, 95% of the students used to fail in the all-important 10th grade exams.
Together with like-minded friends, we launched SECMOL, the Students' Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, and said enough is enough.
Working with the government, we rewrote many textbooks, retrained the teachers, and organized the villagers. And the results started changing too. For those who still failed, we started the alternative school that you just saw. And the results? Tewang Rigzin went on to become a top journalist and later became the education minister of Ladakh Hill Council at 27. He had failed his 10th grade 5 times. Stanzin became a filmmaker and has been winning awards across countries. He had failed 4 times. Miss Tinless is today a celebrated social entrepreneur. She had failed 3 times. But now we see that the state of higher education is no better. Not only for Ladakhis, who of course are doubly disadvantaged again, but for you in the big cities too. It's time we change this. We in Ladakh are dreaming again. This time our dream is to create an alternative university that will use all our learnings from the past 25 years. Once again, a hands-on doers university, where the School of Business runs real-life companies on campus. The School of Tourism runs high-end hotels and simple homestays. The School of Education runs innovative schools. The revenues from these sustain the university while the students get free higher education and of course hands-on experience. But this is more than a dream now. His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche, one of the top spiritual leaders in Tibetan Buddhism after His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is supporting this cause as the chief patron. The Hill Council government of Ladakh has earmarked roughly 200 acres of land, and the ice stupa artificial glaciers have already started greening this desert. A fully solar-heated, mud-built university township is being planned by some of India's top architects.
Together, let's start the next learning revolution, where education is not limited to just the 3 R's, all too much to do with the head alone, where skills of the hands and kindness of the heart are given equal importance. Sure, it would take significant financial resources to materialize this ambitious dream. Recently, I was awarded the prestigious Rolex Award for Enterprise for the ice stupa artificial glaciers.
Sonam Wangchuk.
I contribute my Rolex Award as a seed for this cause. Thank you very much. I have decided to contribute the roughly 1 crore rupees as a seed fund to finally raise 150 crore rupees for the first phase of the project. And I very much hope that you all will join me and match this contribution according to your capacities. Together, we can change the face of higher education forever, not just for Ladakh, but for the whole world.
So join us. The future has already begun.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And this is not the end. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an inspiration and truly exceptional journey, the one and only Sonam Wangchuk. I'd like to request Mr. Anil Kumar, Chairman IESA, to please come up on stage. And we'd like to present a small token of our appreciation on behalf of all of us here, the entire IESA family. And thank you, sir, for having accepted our invitation and being a part of this event and bringing it to a spectacular close.